This title has changed a little, but we are talking about policy-making instruments, how to cope with the COVID. Many issues at stake, all sorts of lockdowns, whether to do them, whether children should go to school, not to go to school, surveillance issues. So we go to the arsenal of having evidence or credible evidence in medicine. So in this toolkit, we have first traditional practice. This comes to the medieval laws on epidemics, is restriction on travel, isolation of cases and contacts, and burning victims' property, what we see in the picture. So we still pursue the medieval practice and maybe burn the destruction wreaked on many businesses today, the modern parallel of burning property. So traditional medicine, what we learned from the past. We have the ethos of evidence-based medicine, born in the 1990s. There are hierarchy of research findings, and we seek the best kind of evidence. I mean, the name is a little misleading. No system of medicine denies the need of evidence, but evidence-based medicine has its own hierarchy, what study counts and what does not count. And we don't have practically any real study that counts for COVID by the standards of evidence-based medicine. There are a few standards. What we do have is tradition that was initiated by the NIH in the 70s and became popular. Consensus developed conferences, and we'll talk about it soon. Or we try to kick off research, and there are all sorts of titles for research in extraordinary situations. Shlomi touched it, some call it hybrid, the clinical research hybrid, the learning healthcare systems. We have a policy and we learn while acting, and all sorts of models that deviate somehow from the rigid division we have since the Helsinki Declaration between research and practice. So the panel decision making that was born by the NIH is basically what governments all over the world are doing. It's even if they don't say it or don't know it, is to collect a bunch of experts and ask them to tell us what is to collect the evidence, scientific evidence, and translate this panoply of research of all kinds into a consensus about practical actions. That it is practically an imitation of the tribunal system. The experts are judges. They need not be expert on the particular research, but they need scientific background. They need to be free from bias and give us the best opinion. This model has been displaced in many ways in medical epistemology by evidence-based medicine that counts the statistics more than the consensus of experts. But when we are dealing with the COVID, every government has at least one body of expert advisors to give its opinion. And we have the issue of research. We need to conduct research because we know little. And research in public health is challenging. And as Shlomit indicated, there is a tradition evolving about leniency in research ethics, especially in situations of disaster. It's not that clear whether the COVID crisis worth the name disaster, not because it's not deadly, unexpected, or horrible, because most research ethics and work on disaster is about the initial response. Now that we are 9 months into it, 8 months into it, things are a little bit different. But anyhow, this is an example from the literature that we need some leniencies about informed consent, about privacy, about collecting data, but I am not seeking this kind of research in our talk. Because when we think about the question whether to announce a lockdown in a place, issues of informed consent or privacy are not relevant. It's not clinical research. It's a different methodologies of coping that don't even fit this kind of discourse on large-scale public health, genomic, or disaster response policies. And the challenge of public health policy is that the research subject is the public, not individuals. Individuals affected, but the issue of informed consent or privacy is secondary, and endpoints are much less clear. And in public policy, there is a very strong drive towards very demanding endpoints. This is a famous quote from the head of the Environmental Protection Agency about noise. And they say in protecting health, absolute proof comes late. We don't need much proof in order to take active measures and to prevent disaster. And many people and many governments reacted during the corona under this sign. We better take little risk, have high level of restriction, but the risks that are taken are not medical risk, maybe not direct medical risk, but the suffering, the economic destruction, the indirect harm to well-being are quite significant. So there's another kind of research. It has been done, and this body of research comes behavioral insightings. This came from behavioral economics. It started outside of medicine, but we see, for example, COVID-related research, how much information to give in a brochure. There is double-blind studies. In this case, you formulate different kinds of brochures or create commercials. Some are more detailed, some less detailed, and then you randomize the population, and you see where the response rate is better. The same, they publish research on hand washing and other measures. And there are plenty of other research published in behavioral economics and policymaking in terms of education, improving the rate of compliance with tax payment, and so forth. However, what we see in all this research published in behavioral insightings that we are dealing, it's restricted, not by explicit choice. I've not seen it anywhere. But when you check the research done, there are shallow questions, there are prudential questions, they are value-free. The value we wish to promote, for example, is washing hands or compliance with self-quarantine measures. This is not put into research. Research is seeking to find out the most efficient means to promote the chosen goal. That's why it's shallow. The price is not high, whether you formulate the brochure in this way or that way. It's about nudges. There is shallow participation in it because the stakes are not high, the public is not involved, the public does not usually know it is under a certain kind of manipulation, if you say, that one city or one region or a group of people are randomly chosen by a computer receive certain kind of information from the government, and the control group receives another kind of information. People are not aware of it. And it's labeled neither medical nor political. It's considered pure professional. You don't need medical knowledge about this because the medical goal is preset, wash hands. And it's not political because such participation is shallow, is not subjected to political approval. It's being endorsed and conducted by public administrators. So this is not the body of research currently used to decide lockdown policy, for example. And if we go to experimenting with social policy that with higher stakes, much higher stakes, for example, whether to open shops or open schools, whether to let concerts in the open air or not let concerts at all, or whether to let the concerts hall be half-filled, and you would say, well, let's try one city with school open, another city with school closed, and let's compare the results. People do not like being subjected to experiments. And why? We know from the literature. There is issue of equality. Patients and means, not the sole focus of care, is a concern. People have experiment aversion. We know it from the vaccination battles from the 19th and 20th century. We have the Helsinki heritage that you need individual informed consent and concern about exploitation. And there are plenty of battles about the conditions for research. Okay, we will do research if we agree what is fair, what is proper to do for the control group. And at the bottom of it, I wish to suggest, and this is the message for today, goes down to two conceptions of science and politics. And if we go to the birth of the word scientist in the beginning of the 19th century, that's where William Bevel coined this term from the British Academy of the Advanced Sciences. We have this idea that was born about the scientific method that we all take for granted, but it was formulated only then. There are competition among hypotheses. Scientists are smart people that come up with hypotheses. These hypotheses are subjected to harsh processes of falsification, and only the evidence, the hypothesis supported by the best evidence survives. And as you can see, and as Carroll, the philosopher of science, argues, this is exactly the idea of Darwinism, the survival of the fittest. There is Darwinism going on in the head of genius scientists, and only the best hypothesis survives. And this goes in a way against the modern democratic public policies, where politicians propose action plans, there is a citizens' vote, elected politicians create and execute policies, they use much leeway in relation to original platforms, public debate, and citizens vote again. But in a way, it's a similar Darwinian struggle. In the first one, in the scientific, if you go for scientific evidence, if coping with COVID is a matter of scientific epistemology, just to find the best scientific evidence, then patients feel their mere means in the production of science are subjected to Darwinian competition. Or in politics, the patients, the citizens are pawns in a political game that politicians try them here and try them as platform. Either you do socialism in one place and capitalism in another. It might be similar to trying one COVID coping policy in one place and one in another. But I wish to suggest a third alternative following another recent book by a historian of science, Michael Stevens, and he calls it the iron rule of science, about doing, not thinking. It is about collecting data and remaining loyal to it. He argues that the contribution of science is to collect data, and hypothesis is an excuse. It makes no attempt to decide win or lose. There is no real competition among hypotheses. And theory was a hurdle, has been a hurdle during history. It motivated scientists to collect data and do the hard work in the lab that is quite grueling and often doesn't smell well and annoying. But we need data, and then we think. And this is the case for COVID experiments on a big scale that I wish to conclude with. It's not Darwinian competition. We're in a situation that action is unavoidable. We have to do something. And this equipoise of policy, we don't know what to do. We have medieval traditions. A political decision, we have to acknowledge, is the responsibility of politicians. And it goes for political review. But once politicians decide to keep schools open in Italy now, but close in Israel still, is it ethical not to divert a political decision into a controlled track and collect data? I argue there is a duty, one decision has been taken to fast monitor and divert and build de facto clinical experiments. And this is my argument. And this is what we have to do. Political responsibility is not for predetermined policy. And we should tell scientists and politicians, it's not a competition who has the best idea about stopping COVID. Even if we find out that keeping schools open is the best way, it doesn't mean that the scientists promoting it, the expert, are the smartest. They just happen to think in the right direction. And it comes to do before the Torah was given to Israel, the nation said at the time, that's what the Torah says, Na'aseh v'nishma. The King James Version doesn't translate it. It means we will first do and then we listen. How is it possible? With the COVID, it's possible. First, we don't fight too much with politicians. We don't fight too much with ultra-Orthodox insisting opening the schools. You want to do it? Okay, we turn you into a clinical experiment. You do, but then we follow the evidence, we follow the data, and then we see. Thank you very much.